There's a version of you that checks the phone the moment you wake up. That fills every silence with noise, every free hour with something, anything, to stay busy. That postpones the hard conversation, the risky project, the honest look in the mirror. That lives as if the list of things you'll get to eventually is infinite. That version of you isn't lazy, isn't distracted, isn't just tired. That version of you is running. And you've been running so long, you forgot there was something behind you. There is. You are going to die. Not as a concept, not as a distant statistical inevitability that applies to everyone in the abstract. You, the person reading this right now, with your specific fears and your specific regrets and your specific unfinished business, are going to stop existing. Everyone you love is going to stop existing. Everything you've built, earned, and held on to will eventually disappear without a trace. And somewhere beneath all the noise you've surrounded yourself with, you already know this. You've always known it. The problem isn't that you don't know. The problem is what you've done with that knowledge. Ernest Becker spent his life studying what humans do when confronted with this truth, and what he found was not comforting. In The Denial of Death, he argued that the awareness of mortality creates a terror so fundamental, so unbearable, that virtually every structure of human civilization, culture, religion, status, ambition, love itself, can be understood as an elaborate defense against it. Not a solution to death, a distraction from it, a way of not having to sit with what you already know. Here's what makes that dangerous. The denial works. It works well enough that you can go years, decades, living as if time were not the one resource you cannot replenish, working toward things you don't actually want, staying in situations that drain you, saying you'll start when the moment is right. And the moment is never right, because if the moment were right, you'd have to start. And if you started, you'd have to admit that you've been waiting. And if you admitted you've been waiting, you'd have to ask what exactly you've been waiting for. This video is not here to comfort you. It is not going to give you a 5-step plan for living your best life. What it's going to do is something far less pleasant and far more necessary. It's going to show you the machinery behind the avoidance, how it was built, what it costs you, and what becomes possible on the other side of facing it. By the end, you'll understand why the life you're living might be less yours than you think, why the things you're chasing might be serving a purpose you've never consciously chosen, and why the one thing you've spent your life avoiding might be the only thing that can actually wake you up. That will be uncomfortable. It should be. Comfort is how you ended up here. Every animal on this planet lives under the threat of death. The deer senses the predator and runs. The threat passes, and the deer goes back to grazing. No residue, no dread, no 3 a.m. spiral about the inevitability of its own extinction. The deer does not lie awake wondering if its life meant something. You do. This is what makes the human condition categorically different from everything else alive on this planet. It is not intelligence, not language, not the ability to build cities or write symphonies. It is this: you are the only creature that knows in advance that it will die, and has to find a way to live with that knowledge anyway. Becker called this the terrible dilemma of human existence. You have a mind capable of grasping infinity and a body that will rot. You can imagine forever. You will not last a century. And you have to hold both of those truths simultaneously every single day without collapsing. Most people solve this by not solving it, by deciding, without quite deciding, to not think about it. But here's what Becker understood that changes everything. The terror doesn't disappear because you stop looking at it. Repression is not the same as resolution. The anxiety about death doesn't vanish when you refuse to name it. It goes underground, and from there it runs far more of your life than you realize. It shapes what you pursue, what you avoid, who you become. The fear you never consciously face is still making your decisions. It's just doing it quietly, below the surface, where you can't interrogate it. Becker's central argument is almost too simple to believe. Most of what humans do, the ambition, the status-seeking, the need for approval, the religious devotion, the compulsive busyness, is not what it appears to be on the surface. Underneath the stated reason is an older, more primal motive, the need to feel significant in the face of a universe that is completely indifferent to your existence, the need to matter, to leave a mark, to prove, against all evidence, that your being here meant something permanent in a world where nothing is. Think about the last time you felt genuinely afraid of death, not abstractly, but viscerally. Maybe a close call, a diagnosis, a funeral that hit too close. And think about how quickly you found a way back to normal, how fast the armor went back on, how efficiently your mind returned to the familiar pattern of acting, as if that confrontation hadn't happened. That speed is not resilience. That is a system working exactly as it was designed to, keeping the terror managed, contained, out of sight, keeping you functional, and keeping you, in Becker's word, asleep. The mechanism that protects you from the terror of death is the same mechanism that keeps you from fully living. You cannot have one without the other, and that is the trap you were born into. Simply by being human, simply by being the kind of creature that can look at its own extinction and understand what it means. So the question is, what exactly is the armor made of? What did you build to hold the terror back? And what has that construction cost you? In the next part, we'll go inside the structure Becker called character armor and see just how much of what you call your personality might actually be a wall. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. You think of your identity as something you discovered, the things you value, the way you move through the world, the role you play at work, at home, in every room you walk into. It feels like yours, like something that emerged naturally from who you genuinely are. Becker would not take that from you entirely, but he would ask you to look more carefully at when it was built and why. The character armor doesn't form in adulthood. It forms in childhood, before you had the vocabulary to name what you were afraid of, before you had any real choice about how to respond to it. The child encounters a world that is overwhelming, vast, unpredictable, and threateningly indifferent, and builds a self that can survive inside it. A self that earns love, avoids punishment, manages anxiety. A self that works. And because it works, you keep it. You refine it. You eventually forget it was ever a construction at all. That forgetting is the trap. Kierkegaard, whose ideas run like a current beneath all of Becker's thinking, described this as living inauthentically. Not in the sense of being fake or performative, but in the more precise and more damning sense of not belonging to yourself. Of acting from a center that isn't yours. Of following scripts you inherited from people who were also following scripts they inherited. None of you ever stopping long enough to ask whether any of it was actually chosen. The armor functions through identification. You become the successful professional, the devoted parent, the person who has it together, the rebel, the cynic, the one who doesn't need anyone. These identities are not random. They were selected unconsciously for a specific purpose, to give you a sense of permanence in a world that has none, to make you feel solid, continuous, real. Because if you are something defined, something nameable, then maybe the fact that you will one day be nothing is slightly less terrifying. This is what makes the armor so difficult to examine. It is not just habit. It is not just comfort. It is doing genuine psychological work, holding existential anxiety at a manageable distance. The person who cannot stop working is not just ambitious. The person who cannot be alone is not just social. The person who numbs every quiet moment with a screen is not just distracted. They are managing something they were never taught to face directly. And the management strategy became the identity. Here's the cost. An identity built to manage fear rather than express truth will slowly suffocate the person inside it. You end up living defensively, optimizing for safety, for approval, for the maintenance of the structure, rather than actually moving toward what you want. The years pass, the armor holds, and somewhere underneath it, the life you might have lived waits, patient and unanswered. Becker was not interested in making you feel bad about the armor you built. He understood it was necessary. What he demanded was that you see it clearly without the usual self-deceptions, so that you could ask the question the armor was specifically designed to prevent. Who are you when you're not protecting yourself? And what have you been chasing that was never really yours to chase? That question leads directly into the next part, the heroic projects that organize your entire life around a goal you never consciously chose. Nobody told you that you were trying to defeat death. That's not how it gets presented. What gets presented is ambition, drive, the desire to build something that lasts, to be recognized, to leave a mark. These feel like forward motion, like you moving towards something. Becker's uncomfortable claim is that most of the time you are moving away from something, and what you are moving away from is the knowledge that none of it will last. He called them heroic projects. Every person has one. The career that defines you, the legacy you're building, the number in the bank account that would finally make you feel safe, the reputation you're cultivating in rooms full of people whose opinion you've decided matters. These projects are not meaningless. Becker never said that. What he said is that they carry a hidden cargo. Underneath the stated goal is an older ambition, to matter cosmically, to be the kind of thing that doesn't simply disappear, to win, in some symbolic way, against the indifference of the universe. The project becomes the problem when it's the wrong one, not wrong by someone else's standard, wrong by yours. The heroic project most people pursue was not chosen from the inside. It was absorbed. From parents who needed you to succeed in a particular way. From a culture that measures worth in a particular currency. From the accumulated pressure of every room you grew up in that rewarded certain performances and punished others. You took all of that in, built a project around it, and have been executing it faithfully ever since. Mistaking inheritance for desire, mistaking compliance for ambition. Becker observed something devastating about this. A person can spend an entire life in vigorous, disciplined pursuit of a heroic project and arrive at the end of it, at the deathbed, at the moment when the armor finally comes off, and realize they were the hero of someone else's story. That the thing they sacrificed decades for was never actually theirs. That the life they were so busy building was a very elaborate way of not asking what they actually wanted. And by then, the asking is too late. This is not a small error. This is the central error, the one Becker spent his entire career trying to name. What makes it so difficult to see is that the wrong heroic project can look exactly like the right one from the outside, and often from the inside too. It produces real achievements, real status, real evidence that you are, by any measurable standard, succeeding. The armor is convincing, the project is impressive, and the emptiness underneath, the quiet, persistent sense that something essential is missing, gets diagnosed as ingratitude, or ambition not yet satisfied, or a personality flaw. Not as the signal it actually is. That signal is worth listening to, because it is trying to tell you that the project you're executing is managing your fear of death rather than expressing your actual life. And those are not the same thing. They have never been the same thing. But knowing the project is wrong is not the hardest part. The hardest part comes when the armor stops working, when something breaks through the denial and forces a confrontation you were never prepared for. That moment is coming for everyone. In the next part, we'll look at what happens when it arrives, and why the people least prepared for it are often the ones who seemed most in control. There is a specific moment that Becker was most interested in, not the abstract philosophical confrontation with mortality that happens in quiet rooms with books. The real one, the one that arrives without warning and cannot be managed or postponed or reframed into something more comfortable. The diagnosis that changes the sentence structure of your life, the phone call in the middle of the night, the funeral of someone your age, the birthday that forces a calculation you didn't want to make. Everyone gets at least one. Most people get several. What Becker noticed is that the people who fall apart most completely in these moments are not the weakest. They are often the most functional, the ones who had the most sophisticated armor, the most convincing heroic project, the most airtight system for keeping the terror at a manageable distance. Because the armor doesn't make you stronger, it makes you dependent. And when the thing the armor was built to hold back finally breaks through, there is nothing underneath it. No developed capacity to sit with the truth, no practiced relationship with finitude, no resources built from years of honest confrontation. Just the raw terror hitting a person who spent a lifetime making sure they would never have to feel it. This is not a personal failure. It is a cultural one. Modern society is, in Becker's framing, an extraordinarily efficient machine for keeping death invisible. The dying are moved to hospitals, away from daily life. Death is treated as a medical event, a failure of the body to be managed by professionals, rather than as the central fact of human existence that every person must integrate. Children are protected from it. Adults are discouraged from dwelling on it. The whole apparatus of consumer culture, the entertainment, the distraction, the endless stimulation, functions in part as a system for keeping minds occupied so they never have to be still long enough to feel what's underneath. And it works. Until it doesn't. What Becker found, and what the research that followed him has continued to confirm, is that suppressed death anxiety doesn't dissolve. It leaks. It shows up as generalized dread you can't quite name, as an irrational rage at people who remind you of your own vulnerability, as a compulsive need to surround yourself with people who share your particular system of denial, your worldview, your values, your heroic project. Because anyone who lives differently implicitly threatens the story you've built about what makes a life meaningful. The terror you refuse to face consciously shapes everything from your politics to your relationships to the inexplicable sense on certain nights that something is deeply wrong even when nothing in particular has gone wrong. The crack in the armor is not the problem. The crack is the first honest thing that has happened in years. Because on the other side of the crack is not collapse, or not only collapse. On the other side is the possibility of a completely different relationship with the time you have left. Not the panicked, morbid fixation that people fear when they imagine confronting death directly. Something quieter and more radical than that. The Stoics understood this. Becker understood this. And in the next part, we'll go there. Into the practice of confronting mortality not as a wound, but as the sharpest possible tool for cutting through everything that doesn't matter. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. Every other source of wisdom you have access to is, in some way, trying to make you feel better. Therapy softens, religion consoles, self-help reframes. Even the people who love you most will instinctively reach for comfort when you're in pain. Death does none of that. Death just tells you the truth, and then waits to see what you do with it. The Stoics called it Memento mori. Remember that you will die, not as a morbid exercise in despair, but as a daily practice of clarity. Marcus Aurelius returned to it constantly, not because he was obsessed with death, but because he understood that without the reminder, the mind defaults to treating time as infinite. And when time feels infinite, everything can wait. The difficult conversation, the abandoned project, the honest admission of what you actually want. All of it gets deferred to a future self who will somehow be more ready, more courageous, more free. A future self who may never arrive. Becker's insight cuts even deeper than the Stoic practice. He argued that authentic existence, a life that is genuinely yours, rather than a performance assembled to manage fear, is only possible when you stop pretending the clock isn't running. The confrontation with mortality doesn't diminish life. It restores its actual weight. Suddenly, the trivial is recognizable as trivial. The argument that consumed 3 days of your attention reveals itself as the waste it was. The approval you've been arranging your behavior around loses its grip. Not because you've become indifferent, but because you've recovered a sense of proportion that the denial was stealing from you all along. This is what the deathbed perspective does when you use it as a tool. Not a morbid fantasy, a filter. When you face a decision that feels enormous and paralyzing, you ask, at the end of my life, looking back, will I regret doing this? Or will I regret not doing it? The research is consistent and has been replicated across cultures. People overwhelmingly regret the things they didn't do, the risks not taken, the words left unsaid, the version of themselves they never allowed to exist because the timing wasn't right and the fear was too loud. Write your obituary. Not the one that will be written based on the life you're currently living, the one you want, the person you want to have been, the things you want to have built, said, felt, given. Then look at the gap between that and today. That gap is not a verdict. It is a map. It is the most honest document you will ever produce about what needs to change and why you've been avoiding it. Practice letting go, deliberately, regularly, in small doses. A possession you're attached to, a role that no longer fits, a relationship that has become armor rather than connection. Death is the final letting go of everything simultaneously. People who have never practiced it in small ways arrive at that moment completely unprepared. People who have practiced it understand something the others don't. That what remains after you release what was never truly yours is not emptiness. It is space. And in that space, for the first time, something real can grow. The Stoics, Becker, the Buddhist traditions, the existentialists, they converge on the same counterintuitive truth. Mortality is not what makes life meaningless. Denying mortality is what makes life meaningless. The urgency, the authenticity, the intensity of genuine presence, none of it is available to you while you're running. It only becomes available when you stop, turn around, and face what has been chasing you all along. What you find there is not what you feared. But getting there requires something most people never manage. That is what the final part is about. Here is the truth Becker spent his life building toward. The one this entire video has been circling without quite saying, the life you are living right now, the pace of it, the priorities of it, the quiet tolerances and the deferred dreams and the low-grade dissatisfaction you've learned to call normal, is only possible because you believe, somewhere beneath conscious thought, that you have more time than you do. That belief is the lie, and it is costing you everything. Not in the dramatic sense of a wasted life visible from the outside. The cost is subtler and more personal than that. It shows up in the version of yourself you keep promising to become eventually. In the conversation you haven't had because there will be a better moment. In the work you haven't committed to, because commitment would make failure real. In the love you haven't fully given, because full exposure feels too dangerous. In the years that pass with a strange, ambient feeling that you are watching your own life rather than living it. Present enough to function, absent enough to avoid being touched by anything. Becker called this the denial of death. But it could just as accurately be called the denial of life. What confronting mortality actually does, not the thought experiment, but the real confrontation, the kind that cracks the armor and doesn't let you reassemble it quite the same way, is return you to the specific, irreplaceable weight of your own existence, not life in the abstract, your life, this day, this person in front of you, this work that either matters to you or doesn't. The confrontation strips away the buffer of infinite time and leaves you with something more uncomfortable and more alive than anything the denial was offering. The present moment in its full, unmanaged reality. That is where the change happens. Not in the resolution to be different, not in the list of practices, the journaling exercises, the bucket list. Those can help, but they are tools, and tools only work when the person holding them has genuinely changed what they are building. The change Becker points toward is not behavioral, it is ontological. It is a shift in what you understand yourself to be, not an immortal creature temporarily inconvenienced by mortality, but a finite being whose limitation is not a flaw to be overcome, but the very thing that makes each choice meaningful. When you actually inhabit that, something unexpected happens. The smallness of daily life doesn't disappear, but it stops being a problem. The ordinary moment becomes precise and unrepeatable rather than generic and skippable. The difficult thing you've been avoiding becomes less terrifying than the prospect of arriving at the end, having avoided it. You stop waiting for your life to become worthy of your full attention and start paying it anyway. This is not a comfortable place to live. Becker never promised comfort. What he promised, what the evidence of every honest tradition that has faced this question promises, is that it is more real. And that real, however difficult, is worth more than the most elaborate and painless fiction. You will die. You don't know when. Everyone you love will die. Everything you build will eventually be gone. And none of that is the tragedy you were trained to believe it is. Because the tragedy was never death. The tragedy was the life left unlived, while you were busy pretending it wasn't coming. Stop pretending. Start now. If something in this video unsettled you, don't dismiss it. Sit with it. Write in the comments what you've been avoiding and why. And if you're ready to keep going, the next video is waiting. Walking away now would be the easiest thing to do. It would also be exactly what you've always done.